Okay, um, it is now noon. I'm going to welcome everyone to our March 8th, 2022 SFO Airport Community Roundtable Ground-Based Noise Subcommittee meeting. And we're beginning right at 12 noon. Thank you all for being here. We are meeting via teleconference, and joining us today are staff to the roundtable, Angela Montez, our roundtable administrative secretary, Doreen Stockdale, our interim roundtable coordinator, and I thought I saw Jean. Do we have Jean with us? Jean Rendell, technical consultant from HMMH. We also have Lisa. Do we have Lisa?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
There we go. We have Lisa, Deputy Director of Planning and Building Department with the County of San Mateo. I don't see Linda, but I hope Linda Wolin from the Senior Legislative Aide to Supervisor Pine will be joining us. I don't see Bert yet.
I don't either.
Okay, but I do see our new representative from Congresswoman Spears' office. Welcome, District Director Brian Perkins. And then I think we'll go into roll call.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let everybody know that Alana from the FAA is also present. Okay, for roll call for ground-based noise, Chair Schneider.
Present.
Member Royce.
Present.
And Member Hamilton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. And if we can also now, if Ms. Montez can explain how the public can participate in this afternoon's meeting, we can open for public comments not on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. So for those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment period and for each item on the agenda, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. Please note that members of the public must wait for the prompt in connection with each agenda item before using the raise hand function. Thank you.
Thank you. And for anybody watching, I have to flip from screen to screen. So I don't see any, oops, go to the attendees. I don't see any hands raised. And I know, Angela, we received some written comments, but I think they're on items on the agenda. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I do not have any written comments.
I will say, wow, welcome. We have Kathleen Wentworth with us. So hi, Kathleen, we miss you, but we're glad you're here. Okay, so Ms. Stockdale, if you could lead us off, I believe. So we're closing public comment items on the agenda and moving to our consent calendar.
Correct.
Go ahead.
All right. Again, while we are meeting virtually, we need to pass this resolution at all meetings that allows us to continue to meet virtually and still adhere to the Brown Act. We need a motion and a second for that resolution.
I will make a motion that we pass the resolution.
I will second it.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Royce. Any discussion? Okay, if you could call the roll call, please.
Yes. Chair Schneider.
Yes.
Member Royce.
Present.
Yep.
Or yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. And Member Hamilton.
Yes.
All right, the item passes.
Thank you. And thank you. Agenda items. The first one up is the ground-based noise report number 2, and these are the next steps. Is there a staff update on next steps from our conversation in January?
No, there is no staff update.
Okay. I have to admit that I have been spending less time on the study, even though it sits next to my bed at night, than what to do about the noise metric discussion. I wonder, with the permission of the members, if we could hold off on number 2 and move into number 3, the noise metric discussion, which may then help us figure out what the next steps for ground-based noise would be. Gentlemen, what do you think?
And I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, great. So moving on to noise metrics discussion. And I have to tell for the audience and for the members how I have been struggling on trying to figure out how to best represent the types of noise that the close-in communities experience on that. And I truly wish we were all in a room with a big whiteboard and we could lay it all out there. It would greatly help me understand that. When ground-based noise first began, this is before your time, Member Hamilton, and Member Royce, I think you were with us then. We did mainly talking about the noise, the ground-based noise coming from an airplane as it departed. But there's a range of other noise too that can affect all of our communities. One of them, the Runups, that I think a lot of the complaints I read about in Nextdoor are the Runups, although it's slightly complicated with the managed lane project happening and the electrification of Caltrain. You've got 3 big issues all happening, all that generate a longer term set of noise or time period of noise on that. So with that understanding, I just hope that today we come away with some ideas of how we might look and either in writing or visually represent low frequency ground-based noise on that. Member Hamilton, Member Royce, do you have any other ideas, kind of the big picture on that? Because I've been struggling with it, I have to admit.
No, I'm sorry. I guess when you talk about noise coming from the airport, I guess I sort of break it down into some buckets. And I think you've illuminated. One is the actual departure of the flight. The second would be departures. The third would be the external causes of noise, the service providers. I'm not sure that's within our purview, but it's definitely a noise caused by planes. That's taxis and cabs and everything else. And then fourth would be the noise that might originate or might be exacerbated by man-made objects. And so if you break it down in those buckets, then you could, that's how I look at it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I do the same thing, Mayor Royce. So I agree with you. I might throw in a few more. The way the discussion with Chair Hindi with APU auxiliary power unit usage at the gate, and then taxiway noise. So we've got a couple more subsets, and then of course the Runups, the post repair, post-maintenance work done on jet engines that they have to run the engines for a fairly long period of time. And I don't know, I'm going to go more casual, Tom, if that's okay. I don't know if you had a chance to get a tour yet at the airport. There are 2 areas at SFO where they do the Runups. One is closer to South San Francisco and one is close to Millbrae Burlingame.
Right.
And that maybe there's something we can do there with Runups. I don't even understand, because we've never talked in this level, if Runups have to happen at night because that's how the maintenance schedules work, or can they happen during the day? I have no idea about that. So with that, Al, I kind of like that. Why don't we go to the agenda where we first have the number A. This is the use of APUs, and see if we can go through each one, Al, that you mentioned, and anything else that might come up. So I can talk about the APU use. Do we have staff with us yet that can talk about the San Francisco policy rather than me doing it from memory? Oh, there's Bert.
Yes,
Welcome,
ma'am, you
Bert.
do. Hello, how are you?
Perfect timing. I see that you are at work.
Yes, I am.
We just started agenda item 2, going over how we might talk about all the sources of ground-based noise or low frequency noise. And the first one up on the agenda is APU usage, auxiliary power unit. And what's the second part? used at the gates and at taxi operations. Can you give us an overview? Because we haven't really talked about this in a very long time.
Sure. I made a little PowerPoint for us to see it. If you don't mind, I'll share that.
That would be great.
All right. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. Everybody can see the PowerPoint, I hope.
Very good. It's not on full screen, but that works.
We're going. Hang on. All right. So what is an auxiliary power unit, first of all? Basically, it's a small jet engine that generates the power for the aircraft to run during ground operations and start the engines. So it gives the electrical, ventilation, and engine startability. And oftentimes it's mounted high up in the tail of the aircraft, so it just blows right over a fence line sometimes for the taller aircraft. So the SFO rules and regulations verbatim under Rule 11.4B for auxiliary power unit, APU, to reduce the impacts of jet fuel emissions on the environment and improve conditions and safety for airfield personnel. Operators are required to use the supplied 400 hertz ground power and air sources were available, and it's throughout the airport now. Connect to these sources and discontinue APUs promptly within 5 minutes after chalking the aircraft wheels upon parking at the apron, regardless of the duration at the gate. APUs may be used when aircraft are being towed. Obviously, they might need to have that power source to keep the flight computers, things like that running, or even the air conditioning during a summer day for the staff that are on board the aircraft, because those aircraft get quite hot. Stepping down into point one, we get into APU use not being authorized without prior permission from airport operations during the use of ground power and preconditioned air until a set amount of time prior to the scheduled departure is as follows. And these are different aircraft categories that I'll get into in the next slide, but the duration grows with the larger aircraft. Easiest to say is so 15 minutes for such as 737s. And then when you step it up to the next category D, it's 25 minutes. And we're talking like 757s, 767s, A300s, things like that, larger transports. And then when you get to category such as the A380s, which is the category F, those you can have 45 minutes, just because it's such a large aircraft and it does take time. Next, all aircraft scheduled to be at the gate between 2200 and 07, so that would be 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Required to use ground power preconditioned air where available, regardless of the duration at the gate. APUs are not authorized without prior permission during the use of ground power and preconditioned air until 30 minutes prior to pushback. So it shortens it up a little bit for everybody, lengthens it if needed for the smaller guys. And here's the ICAO design group categorizations. You can see category A, small aircraft, wingspan less than 15 meters. We're talking every single engine aircraft and some business jets. Design group B gets a little larger. You get into the CRJ, Canada regional jets, Embraer 120s, things like that. And then more recognizable are category C, D, E, and F. And we spoke to those a moment ago. Any questions?
Questions from members?
Yeah, Bert, how is that? How is that enforced? Your 15, 25 minutes, 45 minutes?
Our airfield operations staff are the sighting parties, not quite policemen, but
are they? Is
pretty
that
close.
pretty religiously observe those time
It
limits?
is mainly because the cost of fuel, and it's going to get worse for the airlines. They will want
Oops,
to,
everybody's frozen.
I think it's your connection, sir. I see
Al,
Ann.
yeah, it looks like Al, you're the one frozen right now. But if you want to turn off your camera, maybe we'll
Yeah,
get you back.
I hear the voice.
Yeah,
So long story short is the airlines want to be off the fuel as soon as possible. It's expensive. And so they're pretty good about doing that nowadays. We did have a problem where a long time ago, some of the folks were bringing in older DC-10s, things like that, that just didn't have the capacity to move the air through the coolant systems, things like that, on the preconditioned air that we supplied. And so it was a problem, but that's no longer the case.
Through the chair, is there, if someone is in, if an airline is in violation of the policy, is there any consequence to it? What happens if they're found that they're using them
There is a
outside
written
of-
admonishment by airfield operations that then goes into the system. Depending on how many they have, the fine's progressive. So yes,
So fines, okay.
there is a fining system.
Tom, if I may follow up, the fine money goes to whom?
Airport.
Question then on APUs. And typically this is more, well, I can tell you of a neighborhood in Millbrae, if anybody ever wants to take a little tour, it's the neighborhood called Marina Vista. And it is basically tucked up very close to the freeway and tucked up next to the south side of the international terminal and the expansion of Terminal 1. So if we're dividing this up into daytime usage, which could impact a school that's right there. So I don't want to say that daytime's not a problem, but if we're really looking at night and we're looking at those gates that are right next to San Bruno and Millbrae, is there a way that they could use the gates on the other side where the jet engines are pointing to the bay as opposed to pointing to San Bruno and Millbrae? And I know that's complicated because the airlines rent
Yeah.
different gates.
Well, it's a little easier. SFO, in particular, the international terminal, has what they call common use. And common use means that any airline, anytime, pretty much can operate out of any gate. Now, having said that, there are some restrictions to that, and that would be, let's say, certain airlines being next to a lounge that they have leased, they would want to use that gate predominantly. But, you know, something comes up, they have to go across the way, they will. Now, as far as those go, it's kind of a time slot. So they will sort of lay out the use of the gates around the terminal based on time of day and who's there and how long they need to be there and who's coming in next. So it's sort of laid out. Best way to say it is they sort of set up the day and lay it out. And then as things change, they can change rapidly.
Okay, so very much a logistical issue then, how to get people in and out quickly, have enough seating for passengers as they're waiting,
True.
on things like that. But is there a report or does the airport collect data that says how well this happens? And again, if we were to concentrate in one area, night, is there a way to see if the planes are, which gates they're using? And a way to bring a report to that we, the members of the roundtable, or we, the community, would know that we're trying to encourage the airlines, as opposed to mandate, but encourage the airlines to use the gates that don't send the jet noise into the community. You know how in the existing director's report it talks about, it has the fly quiet report, and it says which airlines are doing really good at quieting down
Mhm.
the metrics that are used for that particular report. I'm wondering what set of metrics we might have to first identify which planes, and I'll have to go out to Marina Vista at 10 o'clock at night and listen. Typically then the freeway noise is less, but so you pick up other noises at that time. But are there some metrics we could use?
I guess I could speak with SFO Terminal Services, see what they collect on that. I don't know. Well, I know they're not doing it specifically for this purpose, but it would be definitely for their record keeping on who's in which gate, how long, and just the logistical, the raw logistical.
Okay. I would like to see that. I don't know about the other members.
Yeah, I was about to say, and that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I would imagine that during the day, and especially once the airport is back to full operations as we come out of COVID, that, you know, that type of a consideration would probably just not even be worth it, because all the gates are getting used, and it's a constant ballet between one flight to the next and all of that. So, but at night, if there are many gates that are not being used, because of the volume is so much less. If there's a policy that we put into place that encourages the use of the gates that are facing away from the cities, that seems like a no-brainer to at least attend. So yeah, I absolutely support this, Ann.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Al, comments? And then I should open it. Yeah, I have the problem of opening it at the end of the 3 or 4 bullet points, but I think I'll open it to the public. What I heard from the public is they want to make sure we have a discussion of reporting out on A versus C weighted. So we will get to A and C weighted on that. I think we might have, I see Al, Al's on mute. So with that,
I saw Al twice for a minute.
And the other reason I think it's really important for San Bruno to pay attention, that as SFO releases its EIR, Bert, do we have an ETA for the EIR draft release for the expansion of the North International Terminal, or is it the Terminal 3 and Concourse H? If I'm using the right terms.
I believe the latter is the case.
So
I don't know specifically. Let me get that data for you.
when I looked at the just Tom, so that you know, when I looked at the pre-EIR data, the NOL, the United Terminal, Terminal 3, is going to add a new concourse, and that concourse comes much closer to San Bruno. And again, I think if our main goal, if we can sleep better at night, that's great. We have that school there, the Lomita Park School, that is shared between San Bruno and Millbrae. It's a very old school. They want to remodel it, but that will be a parcel tax. Who knows with those? But airplane noise during school hours can interrupt a child's ability to learn. So it's just another thing to keep in touch there. And that is, on the San Bruno side, a community of concern. On the Millbrae side, for some reason, the way the census tracts are driven, our low-income neighborhood in that area is not considered a community of concern, which takes away some of the tools we have within the environmental laws to try to mitigate impacts of noise, which is unfortunate, but something for us to be keeping an eye on. So Bert, if you could find out about that and report the next time, that would be fantastic. If we could start diving into those metrics, maybe we can find a nice solution to at least some of the nighttime gate usage, and maybe even the early morning gate usage, so that those 5 o'clock flights sitting at the gate aren't waking people up a little too early. That would be lovely. Any comments from the public on APU use?
I had continuation.
Oh, go ahead, Bert. Go ahead.
I believe the gate H, the flights are the tails of the aircraft, it's a one-sided terminal. They're supposed to be focused back at the airport. So it would be a benefit.
That would be great. Yeah, haven't seen it yet, so can't comment on that. But that has been my concern with the H gates on there. I don't see any hands raised from the public. So if we are done with APUs, let's move on to ground equipment from diesel to electrification. Bert, do you have an update on that?
Just have a brief that grabbed from the document provided by our sustainability manager. We have the ground support equipment currently at 34%, and the number of charging ports right now number 256 on the airfield. The near term, by 2023, the airlines believe they'll be at 70% of the equipment. And we'll have 448 ports for charging by 2023. And then the long-term 100% 2040, when they will have the 100% fleet, we're looking at 664 ports for charging. So that would be the summary on that one.
And Bert, just to help me then, this is the I don't know, what do you call them, the golf courts that run the luggage to the airplanes? It is the fuel vehicles.
Baggage carts, tugs, which pull the aircraft in and out of gates, the bag loaders, all the support equipment for the aircraft on the airfield.
Okay, and what about the fuel trucks?
That's part of it as well, eventually.
Okay.
Would it also include the trucks that bring the meals and stuff? Because those come from off property. Just curious.
They do, but like I said, we're talking about all ground support equipment. And
Great.
so they're doing pretty good. Although we'll have to see about the off-airport trucks. But my belief is right now, that's part of the support equipment.
And a lot of those trucks come from San Bruno, South City, and Burlingame, right?
Yeah.
The food supply ones, I think, are on Rollins. A lot of them are on Rollins Road. I don't know about San Bruno.
They come from San Jose too.
Do they?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I don't know if we have much, if anything, that's coming from San Bruno. You might know, Bert. I'm not sure.
Specifically, I don't know, but I know
I'm not aware of any.
Burlingame area.
Okay. And the good news is at least they're electric. They'll run a little bit quieter. Will they have to run the ting, ting, ting while they're on the ground running around?
Ting, ting, ting.
You know, just that some kind of noise because
Backup alarm?
electrics. I'm sorry?
A backup alarm?
Yeah. Well, is it only on backup alarms? To be
That's
honest,
my
I don't
belief
get a lot
also.
of complaints from the two neighborhoods close in about hearing the beeps.
You're talking about the tone that electric vehicles often employ.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's hardwired in. You can't do anything about it. My understanding is I recently had to get a new vehicle, and I ended up getting a hybrid. It has a chorus of angels that go with me, so I have the as I go around. But yeah, my neighbors say they can hear me coming up the street.
Yeah. I have a neighbor with their electric vehicle has that tone too. It's kind of pleasant though. And it's not horrible. Okay. So any other comments from members or staff on ground-based electrification? This is good to hear because my perspective, let's look at the ground-based noise study. It said that 20 feet of trees at best could get about 3 decibel reduction. The human ear doesn't hear 3 decibel reduction. Therefore, is that solution moot? I don't think so. And we'll come back to that. But to me, every reduction in noise, especially for a city like mine that has noise inputs from multiple transportation modes, is good. We're just hit by so many different modes of noise that every decibel to me is valuable. And we're working in tiny increments, but it's a way to get there. If there are no comments from members or staff, anybody from the public comment on ground operations?
Thank you, Chair Snyder. I do not see any hands raised from the public for this item.
Thank you, Angela. Neither do I. All right, moving on to C then. Well, can I add a few more in here back to what Al and I talked about? It's still under noise metrics discussion. Let's talk about the run-ups. Bert, can you, on run-ups, are they mainly at night? Are they all day long? Where can we get the data on run-ups?
We do run-ups reports for the nighttime activity in the director's report.
But what
And,
about daytime?
no, we don't report out on that right now. Most of the run-ups do happen in daytime. And the reason being is we have a preferential policy that if an aircraft's departing before 9 a.m., they may do a run-up on airfield at night. And if it's departing after 9 a.m., we ask that they hold off on doing a run-up till daytime. We have installed ground run-up monitors on the airfield to monitor this, both with cameras and sound level meters. We're in the process of creating a report for that to report out what would be the noise at the site for the run-up versus what's getting into the community, and report out the differential on that and which monitors picked up on it, things like that.
Can I ask a dumb question? As a new
Absolutely.
member, want to make sure I'm completely understanding what we mean by run-up. Because at first I thought we were talking about when they run the engines during maintenance, for
That's it.
20 minutes at a time at night. Is that what we're talking about?
Ground run-up it can be low power, high power, whatever. And typically it's done during maintenance.
Okay.
They'll be wanting to check once they perform the maintenance on the aircraft that the engine doesn't vibrate anymore or whatever, doesn't leak, things like that. Off times are fairly short, but occasionally they have to run it up, keep it up, bring it down, run it up again.
Maybe it was because my subconscious knew we were having this meeting, but I was awoken last night by a run up at 3 a.m. It seemed to go for a while. It was like
I'll check on it. 3 a.m. you say?
It was 3-ish. I didn't wake up all the way.
There's a really big airplane that takes off around 3:12, wakes me up 4 or 5 times a week, maybe 3-4 times a week. And I've been meaning to ask Bert what that is. I'm assuming it's an Amazon plane because the noise is and the vibration shakes my house on that one at 3 o'clock. Bert, what I hear, and I don't know if we've got anyone from Burlingame, but when I read Nextdoor, which I don't have the time to keep up with anymore, what I hear mainly and quite often from Burlingame residents, I think they're being impacted by run-ups, daytime and nighttime. And I'm guessing, and it's a complete guess because I haven't seen, I'm looking forward to the report you're doing, that it's coming from the run-up location that's by 1 left and 28 right? Is it kind of tucked up in that area on the runway?
We actually have 3.
Oh, there's 3.
Yeah.
Or 2.
Well, 2 of them fairly close to each other on the bay side of 1 right, and very close to the end. The other one is off of the 28 right at the last taxiway just prior to it, and that's Charlie Whiskey. The site at Charlie Whiskey is used the most infrequently of the 3.
Is it reasonable then, if we're working on a report that reflects ground-based noise, that we could get a map that shows these and shows the breakdown of day, evening, and night on that? And I think the reason
Good.
when I pay attention to when I hear the people from Burlingame, it's because the run-ups are so long. And that helps with you saying that sometimes it can be just a simple, the pitch might be the same, but sometimes it's up, down, up, down, up, down. And that's when people hear something that's less familiar to them, I think they find it more irritating. I find it more irritating because I'm awake and I'm trying to figure out what is that. So sometimes knowing what is going on and why it's doing it can make us a little more understanding. Or it can say, really, truly, why are they doing a run up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Does that really have to happen if it's impacting thousands of people's ability to sleep? So if that report that
No,
you're working on, Bert,
understood.
can help with that.
We could do that. I do recall one run up that we had years and years ago, probably 15 years ago. It was an MD-80. It was on the far side of the airfield, and it sounded like it was taking off. And sounded like we had another one take off. And finally, a little while later, I went over to go eat lunch, and it was in the cafeteria there. I look out across the airfield and I see an MD-80 facing the terminal, and I hear the run up going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not a takeoff. It's an MD-80 that keeps doing another run up after another run up. This went on for 3 hours.
Wow. Yeah, but that points to a question with the airlines, or I always tend to think of it as United, but it could be any airline could be doing maintenance work, right? So it's
Yeah.
any airline. Is it their regular pilots in the plane right then, or is it somebody from the airport operations? And can they always at least make sure that the engines are pointed out into the bay at all times?
Typically,
Every
it's a
time.
mechanic in the airplane, one on the ground, one in the cockpit. The mechanic behind the flight controls has to be certified to do it. And then as far as where they want to put the aircraft, typically, yes, they'll put the nose into the wind, tail over the bay, because that's the prevailing wind flow. And also too, reduces, depending on how strong the wind is, things like compressor stalls with the engines, things like that.
So what happens with alternate flow days then? Could that be one of the reasons why we're hearing or experiencing those on alternate flow, which are happening more often?
Typically, the winds aren't that strong that they would, I mean, it's just a run up. So what they'll do is pull the airplane into position, chalk the wheels, and then go ahead and do a run up. It's not that big of an issue like taking off.
Okay. You know, that's weird. I don't know why we would hear that much of the run-up sounds then, but there are some in the middle of the night that I hear because they run for that 30-minute period, and my brain is sitting there counting the departures and waiting for that second departure sound while I'm counting that noise too. And it's been complicated the last 2 years because of the managed lane project and the work in San Bruno, that really noisy work they were doing in San Bruno. So yeah, Bert, if when do you think you might have a report to come back to show ground-based noise? Or are you going to bring it directly to the roundtable?
Probably to the roundtable. It'll be 2 months probably. We're working with our vendor on it right now.
Okay. Any questions from members or staff? Flipping over, if there's anyone from the public. I don't see many of our Burlingame. I see Joe Baylock. And I think Joe, please join us and
Give me 1 second. I'll just share my screen for the timer. You will have 2 minutes.
and Joe, I believe, is from Millbrae, I think.
And I also do see Jean's hands raised, so we
Very,
can.
very good. Sorry, Jean. Sorry to miss you. We'll get you.
Okay, so Mr. Baylock, please accept this request. Unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Great, thank you, everyone. I am a Burlingame resident and very actively involved in trying to figure out ways to improve the situation here. And my comment, Ann, was around the idea that I find it very difficult to distinguish between run-up and regular takeoffs. I haven't cracked that code yet, and so I think the report would be very useful. And it would be very interesting to see what the actual flight usages are, particularly between midnight and 6 a.m. Because I think there's an opportunity there to take a look at both run-ups and regular departures. Whether the one at 3:15 or not is Amazon, I don't know, but I can tell you I hear it regularly as well, and that's a particularly problematic time for almost anybody. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, for those of us who've been dealing with the airport noise, we've become familiar that on departures on 1 especially, what we hear is the initial blast. And then as the flight moves down the runway, it has another big blast as it lifts off. So, and then because the FAA, it's the weird way they do noise, how many seconds duration of each on that. And Joe, just so that you know, nighttime is from 10 o'clock to 7 a.m., correct? 2200 to 0700 is the time period called night. Bert, correct me.
That's for the CNEL time, yes.
Ah, okay. So thank you, Mr. Baylock. I'm glad we got you to a meeting. Go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a little bit what Bert said about the directions that the aircraft are in to do their run-ups. Most often the wind doesn't matter, but at times they will go to the direction that they want to try the run up, and they will have to reposition to get more flow into the engines from the wind itself. And so if they're in the opposite direction of the wind, the engine will stall and they can't continue the run up. So they will have to occasionally turn more into the wind in order to, they don't have to turn directly into the wind most often, but they will turn to where they have some of the wind coming into the engine. And it also depends on whether they're doing a low power run up, high power run up, or whatever. But there are times that I've experienced that they actually have to turn the aircraft in a different position to get the airflow into the engine so it doesn't stall.
You know, thank you, Gene. Bert, when you write the report, because this is just one little aspect of the ground-based noise, if we could talk about that, and it'll help people understand what's going on. In the olden days, pre-climate change, most of the prevailing winds were daytime. I'm a windsurfer, I used to be a windsurfer. And around 7 o'clock at night, winds typically would die down unless it's wintertime or unless it's a clearing storm wind. So I would still think that if they needed that wind, which Gene, I understand, they need to test to keep the airplane and safe, they would have to do that in the daytime, more so than nighttime, unless there's a clearing or storm wind at night, which then changes the noise experience entirely because of wind, the sound of wind on there. So I just, if the report could have an explanation of what's going on so the lay person can say, ah, this is what's happening out there, as well as data that we can take it apart and say, well, does that 3 o'clock run up really have to happen at 3 o'clock? And if it is, should they be fined for doing that? And here's the big one. If they're going to get fined for waking up the close-in communities, should that fine money go to the close-in communities that are impacted by that sound? So I'm just
I
throwing
think
that on
the
the
FAA
table.
would argue that one with you.
Yeah, well, we have plenty of things to bring up with the FAA to bring equity to all communities, but equity especially to close-in communities, because we're bearing the brunt on that. But that, you know, if we could just have a better understanding of that aspect. I don't see any other hands raised, any other members or staff before. Al, you mentioned another one. So we've got APUs, we've got run-ups, we've got ground-based operations. You had mentioned the traffic coming in and out of the airport and buildings. So they're not on the agenda. Are we allowed to talk about it when they weren't specifically agendized? Technical question for staff.
You can do that.
Okay, so Al, which one do you want to do? Do you want to do, the experience of Millbrae when SFO created the Uber and Lyft parking lot was pretty, it was more of a traffic issue than a noise issue, thankfully, because most of those cars are hybrids or are hybrid, so they don't make a lot of noise. But that is an issue, especially the noise coming in from the freeway. And it is my understanding that, well, this is what happened when managed lanes, when I talked to managed lanes about any noise abatement the new construction on 101 would do. And their response to me was, well, Millbrae, you're already so noisy, we didn't do any noise abatement, which as an elected official representing 23,000 people is very irksome on that. So Al, go on about the issue you brought up.
Well, I was just trying to break it. Yeah, I was trying to break it down in the different buckets of noise that that probably ought to be discussed or explored. With respect to the noise from the ground surfaces, the service vehicles, whether it's taxis or buses or trains, etc., that's outside the purview, I think, of the airport per se. But that's something that may need to be addressed with the agencies you alluded to, Ann, and it sounds like you've already done that. But that is a category of noise that contributes to the annoyance and or disturbance of residents that are nearby that may not exist with cities that are far away. That we need to give some thought is who's responsible, what could be done, and who should we be talking to. That's my only comment around that. Man-made structures, I think we've already talked about at some length. That was the other category. The last we met, we had some conclusions from that noise report. Some of them were not very encouraging, frankly. My notes indicate, the conclusions: vegetation not effective, barriers not possible. There were rubberized asphalt not feasible. I mean, we went through some specific conclusions on all of it. We left open the categories of types of planes or that might have an impact, and we left open runway design, what kind of impact that might have, and if there's anything that could be done with respect to that. We also talked about operational issues, so that's outside those last two categories. But were there recommendations we can make, or were there input that we needed with respect to operational issues that might have an impact on the noise? And I guess my thought last time was, is there something that we can get to the point where we can come up with some specific recommendations? And I don't know, but that's what I was trying to get to. And on those buckets, those 5 buckets on the external noise, the recommendation, I guess, is find out what agency is responsible for it, what kind of the evaluations and studies they've done, and what options exist to reduce that noise. That's my only comment there.
I think that was perfect, Al. I'm completely with you on that. In terms of the car truck traffic, the 101, the 380, San Bruno, Millbrae Avenue, I suppose Airport Boulevard from South City, but I'm not sure that much traffic comes in that way. Business traffic, the trucks feeding the airport. But I wonder if that, to me, and I haven't been able to dive into this, this is California Public Resources Code Title 21 that measures that. And I did hear from members of the public that we're hoping that we could get an update on a NEAM. And I'm putting Bert on the spot again. Sorry, Bert, you're always going to be on the spot. But with a NEAM, if we could all have a better understanding with how a NEAM works, and that might be a full roundtable deep dive on that, then we can pick out the various sources of noise from that are not airport related. But my feeling is that all of these noise inputs that the close-in cities have create a baseline, and then the airport gets to sit on top of that baseline, which again, at nighttime, most of those noises have gone away, making, Bert tried to explain this to me when I was new on the roundtable. You hear it more at night because there's less ambient noise. Is that correct, Bert? That's kind of how you explain it. But the reality is where I can live with it during the day, at night, it is really hard to live with. So it's nighttime concentration. So I think, Al, I think it's a Title 21 issue, and maybe that's a next agenda item to dive deeper into Title 21 on that, because that's Caltrans. And that, I think what little I've been able to do is California uses the FAA metric, but they slightly abbreviate it, but it still doesn't address what we, the cities with the close-in communities, get. And they don't address the one thing that did get proven in the ground-based noise study is that the noise actually grows as it goes up the hill. So when you're at the top of Hillsborough, it is horribly loud up there on that. And that, I don't think anybody is addressing the topography input. And maybe the topography, let's just say it's Amazon. And so I'm picking on Amazon at the 3:12 to 3:15 flight in the morning. And it's taking off, I'm guessing, from one left or right, because I don't turn on my computer. I'll never get to sleep then if I do that. Turn on the computer to see that airplane taking off on the new software. But could it take off on 28 right and do an immediate right turn, so it's not going over San Bruno, And we'd only get some of the noise, some of the 45-degree angle noise that way, instead of all of the noise. That's that kind of noise or solution, Al, you were alluding to. If at night, if there are fewer flights taking off, could the choice of runways, now I know I believe the airlines get to choose the runway they are most comfortable with. And a lot of them may want the gap departure at night so they can take off for China or things like that. But that's keeping thousands and thousands of people awake over gap departure with a low frequency noise sound, let alone the in-flight sound. So we haven't gotten there yet. And how do we get there? Bert, Jean, how do we get to having enough data for we as the close-in communities to say, why are you using runway 1 instead of 28 for this departure at this time of night? Is that where we'd like to get to, Al?
Well, if I
Yes,
may,
I'm sorry. Yes.
I know I kind of
Um,
went all over there. This is that part in my head that I just haven't come up with a straight solution.
right. We have limitations on what we can do. First of all, the pilot's in command of the aircraft. Second of all, the tower typically will set up what they would like to see. So for them, typically they like to have departures on runway 1, arrivals on runway 28. The airport operates most efficiently for an air traffic controller that way. As far as our preferential runway use, we ask that a 10 departure be used at night, which is to the east. And that would be most helpful for the community. Unfortunately, with the opposite direction operations rulings that the FAA came up with a few years back because of arriving and departing aircraft going head to head is a bad thing. They ended up separating it by 25 miles. And most of the airlines really aren't willing to sit out there and wait and idle for a slot to go. Though, in fact, Tower was telling them, I think 45 minutes was a typical wait. So airlines say, all right, fine, we'll do whatever you got. Our next preferred is what you mentioned, Ann. We call it a shoreline departure. It's runway 28 to the west, and then they turn right and go on about their way. Works well with the nighttime departures called nights, and we think that's another one. Third most preferred would be a runway 1 departure, which you're familiar with, Ann, and then the least preferred is a gap departure. Unfortunately, destinations at night typically are Asia, and typically you're using a heavy aircraft to do it, and they will be going out to San Bruno Gap.
And that's because their airports have curfews and we do not, correct?
Not necessarily. Some, yes, others. We did a survey on that. Kathleen asked that we take a look at that. We only found one airport that had that curfew issue at the time, and not the conflict that we had before. Now,
And which airport is that? Just so I'm curious.
I haven't opened that study in months, so
Okay.
I'd have to look back at it. But yeah, I'll make a note to do that. But as far as the information goes, we've made those preferential runway uses clear for many, many years.
So, Bert, are there that many flights? Well, to be honest, between midnight and 2 o'clock, sometimes there is a flight every 3 minutes.
Midnight,
are-
there's a decent wave going out, yes.
So there are that many that would meant that the number 1 preferred departure, meet a 10 departure, which would make everybody happy, I think, can't happen, especially between midnight and 1. Are there other time periods where there aren't that many planes, so you don't have to worry about the 25 miles apart? I mean, I get you don't want airplanes doing this.
Right. And so it's our preferred ask. We tell the airlines that, and we tell the tower that. Now, as far as what goes on with the operations, yeah, it's one of those things, and it's kind of a rare thing where they get that hole where they can put that aircraft out on 10. And it's infrequent enough that the captain of the aircraft is not going to gamble that he'll have to go out there, he or she will have to go out there and sit for that amount of time to wait for that hole. Now, if they're familiar with going out at say exactly 3:30 in the morning, and they know that nothing else is going on, we're more likely to find that captain willing to take the gamble.
Okay. Again, how could we get data that shows us data that would make sense to those of us who aren't in your shoes, Bert, that we could look at nighttime departures and see if when I first joined the Roundtable in 2016, we had by far more thank you events to specific airlines who had done a lot of work to reduce their noise impacts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about that at the Roundtable, that program is coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But if we highlighted airlines that are doing their best to reduce nighttime noise, and I mean departures, not arrivals, then that's that. I'm losing my words. That's the nice way of recognizing change and trying to encourage change with the others.
Mhm.
And then there are the airlines that might not want to. I could say they're arrogant. I could say maybe their pilots aren't as well trained as some of the other pilots. So maybe we definitely don't want them doing something where they might be at more risk than a better trained pilot. On something like that, is there anything we can do to encourage different runway use by the airlines and by the tower by making them aware of just how bad the impact is at night on the close-in communities?
Well, I'm always a fan of the power of the pen. I'm surprised the Roundtable hasn't written a thank you letter to the tower saying we appreciate your use of runway 10 at night when available. That's always a great way to do it. We do it occasionally here when we notice something going a good trend. We'll fire off an email pretty quick and say, hey guys, we appreciate that. It works real well. Thank you. We'll do the same for the TRACON as well.
It's a good idea. I've added it to the to-do list. I do come from an activist background, and yes, it's great to use honey, but there then comes the time to use the stick. I just mixed metaphors, sorry about that. So, there comes a time that if there are a couple of airlines that are notoriously bad, and I use Amazon because I really do not think I need to make Jeff Bezos richer by not being able to sleep at night. It irks me on that for somebody to get their shampoo in 24 hours, I don't get to sleep. So Amazon is the one that I tend to pick on as the worst case example on that. And I don't know, I'm just assuming that we've got a fulfillment center in San Bruno. There are more, and that SFO added more cargo during COVID to help make ends meet. And we are suffering these really heavy planes departing. And if it's cargo, I'd love to see them on a different runway. I don't want to send it into Gap. I don't want to make it. I don't want to be transferring air, but I want all of our people to sleep at night.
No, I understand. And one thing to consider is the simple fact that a lot of the COVID cargo flights, we got notice they were coming. We didn't ask them to come. And so the weird thing about cargo is, as we were trying to create some reports during COVID, looking at when flights operated and when all these things happen, we tried finding a listing of schedules for these cargo carriers, and they're out there. The problem is they're so rarely adhered to because of late arriving trucks, additional cargo being put on, whatever. We found more and more reasons that these things fluctuate on what time we'll see them arrive and then depart. And so it became really kind of a cat and mouse thing as we were trying to figure it out. And the more we tried to chase it, the more we figured out that it was kind of fruitless.
Let me ponder that one. Does the current director's report include the new airlines, the cargo airlines?
We include all carriers that are operating, that are jets, yes.
Okay, I'll have to dive into the more recent one and see what they are.
Well, as
This
far as
Al, I'm not sure we're
Prime-
getting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
as
ahead.
far as Amazon Prime goes, I think you'll be really surprised. So we have Sun Country flying their cargo. We have ATI, ATN, and Airborne. So, and then occasionally we get their own liveried aircraft.
I don't know what a liveried aircraft is. Is that a charter?
Painted with their logo.
Ah,
Your livery is your logo.
Al, did we get anywhere near any kind of
Well, I don't know if we have a recommendation yet, but I think you did raise a major issue, and that is what I think will be a growing issue with increased numbers of cargo planes. As we go more and more online, even after COVID, what are we projecting with respect to cargo flights over the next 5 years? And what are the options? Are those, are they, I mean, are there any other options for cargo flights other than middle?
Well,
Are there any? I don't know.
if I may offer,
But I think that's something that needs to be explored. And actually, Bert, what would happen if, I thought I were at one time talked about the capacity of the airport, and we're at X number of passengers and would go to within 10 years would go to X plus number. But he did not talk about cargo. I guess I'd like if there's any indication of what the cargo flight increase might. And because this problem with me is this going to be growing exponentially. I
Well,
don't
as
know
far as,
recommendation yet. I don't know what our options.
the cargo capacity, I think you'll be shocked, is the reason the cargo carriers came up so much is mainly because the air carriers weren't operating. And so the passenger flights typically carry a fair amount of cargo. And so as they come back,
Okay.
we'll see less of the cargo flights. SFO is not a big cargo hub,
Cargo.
never has been. We've been bigger in the past. Right now we're doing all right as far as what we had been over more recent years. Oakland and I believe, Oakland predominantly, somewhat San Jose.
Just thinking of cargo, if it's COVID, if it's getting emergency equipment to Ukraine, I think the common person would say, no problem. I can live with being woken up at 3 o'clock if it's getting blood samples to a testing facility. That's for the greater good. But if it isn't, then I know we've got Kathleen, I know we've got Brian here, Mr. Perkins here. And I know that Congresswoman Spear had a curfew bill that is going to be very hard to move, but it is a bill and it is very important. But then there could be portions of a curfew. If these planes are taking off and it's not emergency goods in the middle of the night, then they could be maybe one of our recommendations and our legislative push, Al, is a curfew for certain types of flights at night. Obviously not emergency stuff. I mean, we can be reasonable, but what do you think if we kind of look at it, and that's kind of a blurring a line between what we're talking about a ground-based noise and what the Ledge Committee would do? And I don't know if Al's frozen. I can't see you.
No, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but
Can
you're
you hear me?
frozen again. Yeah, there, now you're moving.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm having so much internet connectivity problems today. It's unbelievable. But anyway, I like that idea. I fully agree that if it's emergency, then those are different sets of rules. If it's not emergency, then we have to understand what the scope of that is. And there are there options like putting a nighttime curfew on it. At some point in time, if cargo becomes a real immense issue, and this is really out of the box and is down the road, but there may be the need for a separate airport to deal with cargo flights and deal with land transportation. I mean, at some point in time, and I'm looking out 5 to 10 years, because I just think cargo becomes increasingly more predominant over the next decade, not less. Like it or not, I just think that's going to happen. And I'm not sure SFO at some point in time might reach their capacity level and might have to limit themselves to passengers only, even though passenger flights per, that was very helpful. I wasn't fully appreciative of how much cargo they carry, but that makes sense to me. But you know, what are the pros and cons of that? I mean, the long term out, the next 30 years, is there any plans for additional airports? And if so, could they be, you know, would there be some room for cargo flights off land which is not heavily populated? That's a wild idea, I know, but
I keep
you know,
thinking,
I think we need to start looking at this problem.
you know, I
Sorry.
like that, Al. Tom, I don't know if, you know, chime in, but we're also supposed to be, it's not on this agenda item, or this agenda is our work plan. And I'm just checking here, future work plan, future discussion item. So let's add cargo usage. You know, the thing that we don't ever talk about, we talk about the commercial carriers, but and the folks from Burlingame, I don't know about San Bruno, but I get an incredible number of helicopters over our house. Some of them are medical, a lot of them are Coast Guard, and they fly right over my house, so I see them. And we get the general aviation out of whichever little airport. And then we've got the private jet owners out there. And, you know, after a while, when you add all of them, it can just get to be too much. And what Chair Hindi wrote back to me when I wanted to get emissions added to this committee was, well, we've got to start looking at supersonics and drone flights. And then even that drone taxi service, air drone taxi into the airport, only $250 from Palo Alto to SFO to fly a drone. I think it's a driverless drone aircraft coming up. So we do have a couple of other things. Let's throw that into what to talk about on the work plan. If that's, what do you think, Al? Is that okay? Because I think this cargo discussion is,
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, my environmental hat says that more cargo should be moving by train. It is less climate change impact going by train than going by air. No matter, there's just not enough green fuel created for all the airports and all the airlines in the world. So cargo, if it's not really needing to be there in 24 hours, should go by train or by truck. And then we all know that there's a shortage of truck drivers. So we're in that period in here on cargo. Great topic though. Your other question then, the operational stuff, I think we've got staff tell me, we've talked about how these different ground-based noise inputs could possibly point to different operational things. Like if indeed Concourse H is going to have all of the gates pointing into the bay, great, don't have to worry about that. But if we're looking at the south side of the international terminal, where I can sit in Marina Vista and see into the portholes on the airplanes at those gates, could we get more of them at least at night on the other side? That's an operational action, isn't it? We could come up with our list of different operations. We didn't talk about the airplanes as they taxi out and wait on the runway. And we didn't talk about the fact that the runways were moved closer to Millbrae and Burlingame by 250 and 450 feet, and the impact of that. And if it's a smaller airplane, do they have to start right at the blast gates? Can they start farther down? Will that reduce noise? I know we still have Kathleen, and it's so lovely to have her. I think she brought this up at our last meeting. Is there a way that an airplane works on the taxi? Are there ways that they don't taxi with their engines pointing at Millbrae and Burlingame, that there's another way they can use the taxiways to keep the jets, the APUs, if that's the only thing running pointing towards the bay versus pointing towards the city? that's to me, an operational change. And then again, can a lighter, smaller plane take off a little bit farther? Because I hear much more noise now at my house on the 400 block of Palm Avenue than I did 5 years ago. And some of that pre-COVID was we were getting up to 57.5 million passengers and corresponding flights. But Bert, or Al, your question, their goal was to get to 71 million passengers. So we had, SFO
71,
has
yeah,
much more
that's-
growth ahead of them to get at 71 million plus cargo.
Yeah, we're like 51 million now.
85% was in the paper
Aren't we at like
recently.
51 million now or something?
At 51 million now. So they're getting almost back to normal. With then, of course, it's been pretty
Well,
quiet lately. I'm assuming Ukraine has done something, has canceled flights or something like that. Back, if there's nothing else here, I see a member of the public. We haven't gotten to A and C weighted yet, but Peter Grace, go ahead. And welcome, Peter.
I do want to talk about A and C weight, and it's really important, but I do want to say that Title 21 covers only A-weighted noise. Title 21 does not address C-weighted noise at all. Secondly, I've looked at the Amazon flights while we were talking. Today, they were the only flight that took off from SFO between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. this morning. Of the last 9 events of this Amazon flight, 3 took off runway 10, the preferred runway. 4 took off 28R, which wakes me up in Brisbane. So there is a cost.
Okay.
I realize, Annie, there's tension between us because we both want to have the noise go elsewhere. 2 of the flights took off runway 1. None took off the gap. And today, the only flight between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. was this Amazon flight, ABX 3167. And I'd like to talk about a NEAM, an A-weighted and C-weighted when we come to it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. And obviously, I don't want Brisbane to be impacted by a 28R. Maybe if we can get night, then Peter, would the procedure we talked about at Roundtable last month, going up to, is it night to the waypoint and then out to Gob, that would help you, wouldn't it? Would it help everybody in Brisbane?
And there are 2 legs tonight. One is to take off runway 1, which is the less preferred. A higher preferred is take off runway 28R. They are both called night. One affects Brisbane specifically, and one affects Millbrae specifically. So I'm feeling it's one of the things we've just, both our cities need to look at what's happening and keep an eye on what's happening. Because unfortunately, it's not a zero. We're both affected no matter which one is chosen.
To me, and this sounds a bit facetious than that, the answer is curfew. And we've got to start talking some solutions at 3 o'clock in the morning, because you don't get back to sleep until 5. And if you've got an 8 o'clock meeting, I'm a zombie the rest of the day. It's that horrible, that 3 o'clock flight. Thank you, Peter. Okay, looking back at the agenda, I think, and I'm allowing this meeting to run slower so that we have time to kind of think about implications on this.
Through the chair, I just to let you know, I mean, I do have work meetings for my day job to get to after this one, so I
understood.
I don't have ultimate infinite time after.
Okay. No. We'll finish at 1:30
Okay.
with respect for everybody. We've added a few items already to agenda item number 4, the historic or the future work item plans for 22, 23. Because I still don't know how often ground-based noise will meet. It was a lovely surprise to get to meet in January and in March. And I hope that our vice chair, Al Royce, will continue to help us get to meet at least every other month. And again, I offer City of Millbrae, you know, even if I have to take notes for the meeting, that we can meet more frequently so that we can not have that long time gap to stretch our memories on that. So, and keep the meetings to an hour and a half. So Millbrae is going to have to do our own to deal with emissions, because again, we have what I perceive as a cancer cluster here. We're going to have to start working on that just for the health of my people. So, but Millbrae can step in if Roundtable can't. But Vice Chair Al, if we can meet every other month and get that on the schedule, then we can really plan meetings and not feel so stressed in getting everything into a short time on that. I also know that Brian Perkins sent me some information that I haven't had a chance to digest, which might help with some noise. But let's move on then. The last agenda item was review of the director's report for possible changes in data. We've talked a little bit about data. I don't think any of these are ready to go into the director's report yet. Bert, would you agree? And Tom or Al, where are you on that? I don't think we're quite there yet.
We're actually very close.
That's good to hear.
And if I may.
But in a perfect world, would you like to run this report past this subcommittee before the full roundtable?
Possibly technical, but
Could be technical.
anyway, let me show you what we're staring at right now.
Just like the question is, should a deep dive, a NEEM discussion be technical rather than ground-based noise, because it affects all of us?
It should be probably ground-based noise, not ground-based noise, but technical.
So,
And so let's see.
so we'll have a technical working group in a month. If we could get a NEEM onto that, that's been a request by a number of the public to me as a ground-based noise chair. If we don't have another meeting, who knows when, let's get it into the next working group.
So here's what we're staring at right now so here's what we had before is the ANOM section by monitor, excuse me, and then our community CNEL. So here we're bringing in the NEEM for the non-Title 21 sites. Title 21 sites obviously are 1, 4, 5, 6. We're going to keep 8 as a Title 21 site for a little bit longer. And then we're going to try to do some NEEM work with it and see if we can get it to work a little better. 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 28. It was, oh, I know why 28's not there. It's portable currently because of the Redwood City School District redoing that area. But anyway, the others down here are Title 21 sites. The reason we can't use a NEEM on those is it doesn't have a threshold. In Title 21 states that we have to have a threshold. So here's kind of what we're looking at, some of the sites there. I know Mr. Grace is on the call. So looking at average number of events for site 7, we're seeing 4 there. We're seeing 35 under a NEEM. And this is just a sampling of the data, by the way. Still need to do more fine tuning. But here's what we're looking at in the way of reporting out on a NEEM. Now, as far as going into the C-weighted noise, oh boy, we might have to really redo our page here to be able to fit it in. But anyway, that's where we stand right now. Any questions?
Tom, Al?
No.
I'm you sort of floated out of me a little bit, Bert. My connectivity, not yours. So I'll have to go back and listen to the hearing, but I think I heard what you said and I don't have any questions.
Okay.
But I think if we had a recommendation from ground-based noise, it would be to request the technical working group to, and I believe that's Chair Ortiz, or
Hindi.
Member Ortiz is the chair of the working group. To
No,
request that it,
the chair of the roundtable as a whole is the chair of the technical working group. So
okay, so it would be to request to Chair Hindi that we have enough time on the technical working group to go into a NEAM on that. Al, on Title 21, given that it doesn't include C-weighted noise, I look at that as it could come from a request from the ground-based noise to the legislative committee that we come up with, I don't know if it has to be a bill. I don't know if we can change Title 21 simply by a regulatory change or if it has to be a legislative change. Would staff know the answer to that? We need Title 21, at least for communities by airports, to include C-weighted noise. Period.
Jean,
I-
oh, sorry, Al. Jean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it would be a legislative change through the state.
It is a legislative change through the state. I know I'm not Gene, but it is.
Thank you, Bert.
And it could be a whole lot of ugly if we do that.
Yeah, but
Why do you say that?
Well, to be honest with you, I looked into getting some changes made a few years back. Solicited Gene and many of the other airport noise officers about updating Title 21 to get rid of the analog garbage in it and bring it up to speed with digital and get rid of things that we just aren't doing in there that it mentions and clean it. And I was warned by the state that if you do that, you could find that there would be a lot of problems. And I was like, okay, so I backed down.
Yeah.
I will tell you a story with my Sierra Club hat on when we were looking at the renewable energy standards for California. And there's something really bad in there that burns garbage, very bad carcinogenic action. And they didn't want to open up the legislation because it would allow some bad hydro in. But you know what? If Title 21 is not reflective of what the communities are really experiencing, it needs to be changed. And Al, I would still love to see us talk about this at perhaps the Ledge Committee, the next time the Ledge Committee meets, because it really should reflect real experience.
Yeah, no, but by the way, when we had the last legislative committee meeting, which was way back last fall, if I recollect correctly, and Angela or Doreen can correct me, or Linda, we did talk a little bit about trying to better understand what Title 21 says and doesn't say, because it is hard to read it, frankly. And I've tried to go through it. I've been confused. So maybe if we do have at the next meeting, we'll give some thought to having an explanation of Title 21 and understand what options we have or what changes we may want to propose and what the pros and cons might be. I did write down, as you were talking, I write down where we could possibly get help. And I put down Title 21 until Peter spoke and said it doesn't apply to C, but maybe that's just a means of changing, so it does. Also help around technology and help around operational. I'd like to understand under those three broad buckets, what options, what recommendations may be appropriate. And by the way, Ann, I may be speaking out of turn here, but we've got a lot of smart community members on this. I'd like to understand if they have any recommendations they would make, what they might be that we could consider.
Great.
You know, they may have some very specific and very helpful recommendations we're not thinking of. I know I'm not, probably. So
Happy to. We've got so staff is always welcome. I'm thinking, again, not knowing when the next ground-based noise meeting is, but if a NEAM comes to working group, if we brought back a deeper dive of Title 21 to the next ground-based noise as Title 21 relates, or the missing relation to ground-based noise, low frequency noise, departure noise, even train noise, that's where it's bigger than SFO, that could come back as ground-based noise. But Al, again, staff, anything else that you think can help us get the right tools in place? If we're not measuring the right things and reporting out on the right things, we can't come up with good solutions. So staff, Happy, I'm looking at all of you. I see one hand. I see a hand under Peter. Go ahead, Peter. I'm not seeing staff hands. Angela, could you help Peter Grace opening it up to the public on the discussion of AC weighted Title 21? And I missed Al's 3 buckets, operational, and what were your other 2 buckets?
Technology and Title 21. Nothing magic. I'm just trying to write down where there might be some help for ground-based noise in terms of recommendations.
Sure, thank you. So Mr. Grace, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
I'd like to remind everybody that there was the environmental survey, the National Environmental Survey was done, and it showed conclusively that the old standard of 65 CNEL was not what current people thought was appropriate and acceptable. It was 55. And I do not know how that 55 measures where people were upset on A or C weighted. But please remember, the old standard of 65 is completely unacceptable now and has been shown by the FAA to be unacceptable. The question is when is it going to get implemented? Next topic, and this really is for Bert. Bert, when can you share the event data for certain monitors for both A and C weighted for the months of January, February, and March? Obviously, March is not through. But when you do the C weighted and A weighted, it would be very helpful to have them for monitor 8, even though you say it's not done at the moment. Monitor 7 at Brisbane, where I'd like to say that the number of events went from under A weighted went from 7 to 35 under C. I'd also like to see for number 9 at Millbrae, which is further back than number 8, where the number of noise events, now please listen, Anne, this is really important. What I saw, the number of noise events in Bert's graph or table went from 2 to 152. It went from 2, can you confirm that, Bert? And I'd also like to see it, the A and C weighted event data for number 10 in Burlingame, number 11 in Burlingame, and number 13 in Hillsborough. And basically, until we see this data, we do not know what results we can get out of it. So again, Bert, can you confirm that on your graph, number 9 Millbrae went from 2 events to 152 events in the period?
Number 9 did go from 2 to 152 events. And well, here, I'll just go ahead and put it on the screen. And then site 10 went from 1 to 99. But one thing I do wish to point people to is, all right, so we're looking at 2 and 52. We did have an increase from 34 to 50 CNEL. And then on 10, we're looking at 30 and we went up to 46. Some of the sites do the opposite direction. And so we've noticed that like here, 8 went from 49 to 55, but the noise CNEL went from 57 to 55. So that's part of what we're doing and fine tuning it. These numbers are still in flux right now. I wouldn't say anything other than that.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Bert. As a function of time, we're getting close to 1:30. If Bert, you said we're getting close. So what you've just shown us, is it getting close to bring it to the roundtable in a month versus ground-based noise in 2 months? What?
I asked our vendor if we could pull it off in a month. They thought we could. I'll say yes right now, but it's a cautious yes.
So if this does come to the roundtable, and typically the roundtable doesn't allow for a lot of discussion, would this be a major agenda item so that I can report as the ground-based noise chair? We talked about it, send it to Chair Hindi and let him know that this is something
We
that
can
we need
work
enough
with,
time on the agenda to talk about.
well, then you might want to do it through the TWG first. That way you don't have to kill a meeting with this subject, because I know it would predominate. And then one thing to keep in mind about a NEAM is it's tailoring the system to look for aircraft noise specifically. And you're really using modeled aircraft noise data to be sure that that event is what you're saying it is, and it fits the mold for that type of aircraft. That's why it's so specific. As far as going into trains and cars and everything else, it's just going to say that's community. It doesn't have the specifics to look for those.
Mhm. When we come back to the discussion of vegetation, vegetation can be used for car-based noise on that. And when Al mentioned all the things that the ground-based spectral analysis said, no, this isn't going to work, that didn't work. We still need to bring that back to ground-based noise and talk about how and where selectively it might work. And if it doesn't work this is why I've been pushing to get emissions added back on. Plants absorb particulate matter. They absorb carbon. So there are additional things that we're not allowed to talk about, given that over the decades, SFO Roundtable went from including emissions to dropping sometime in the past, dropping emissions from the MOU, not from the original charter, but from the MOU. So that's another thing to address in the future. We haven't heard from our new representative from Jackie Spear's office. Brian, if you have anything, we're just very happy to have you here. It's a lot of information to absorb. Everything about the airport is a lot of information to absorb. And it's,
well, I don't have anything, Madam Chair. I do note that if there's a concern about changing California law, we can take that up with the Assembly Member's office. But these are regulations, and it's under the authority of the Department of Transportation. So it would perhaps be worth a good discussion, a fresh discussion about how likely it is, and maybe even be an industry-wide discussion within California on that issue. But I'll leave that to Mr. Ganon as to whether or not that's what we wanted to do. Obviously, it's a big bite, that's for sure. And if it involves something that involves changing federal law, we could consider changing one of the bills that Congresswoman Spear has, add a different bill. But at this point, as a practical matter, you have to look for a reauthorization measure, because that's when these things happen. I'm not sure myself when the FAA, its authorities get reauthorized. I think it just got reauthorized recently. So you're probably looking at several years at a minimum.
okay. Well, good. And thank you and welcome. And just so that you know, when I was mayor last year, I was supposed to have a meeting with Caltrans with the regional director, so Director Region 4, to talk about all of the noise inputs from 3 major Caltrans operations in Millbrae. But again, Caltrain, BART, all of the noise impacts. And that might be, at this point, something Millbrae will try. Once we get through this districting process, we'll try to do for us individually, and then maybe we can get Caltrans to understand that in certain heavily noise impacted areas, which they typically would have seen by multiple freeways running through a community of concern, maybe we can get their attention on that. But that's on a future wish list. Peter, I know we didn't get into the deep dive on A and C weighted. That will move to the next agenda. I've taken a bunch of notes. So Doreen, if we can work on action items from this and then run them past Tom and Al before we pull together the minutes for the next meeting. And if we can find out when the next meeting is. I thank you all, unless there are any other comments.
Real quick, Chair Schneider. So again, because we are limited to 2 subcommittee meetings in between regular committee meetings, this month is ground-based and technical working group, and then we'll have a regular meeting in April, and then in May is the work plan and legislative. So this body will meet again in July after the June
in
meeting.
July. All right. So that's good to know. I won't go on vacation. I actually will be at sea for the next roundtable, so I'll write up my notes. And we don't have a co-chair on here. I might be able, the new Wi-Fi on the ships is much better. I might be able to dial in, but if not, I'll send notes to Tom or Al to present on that. I think I appreciate taking the time to dive into those other airport noise inputs so we can get a handle. It's great to hear that Bert is working on those. And if we can get them on that July agenda then, but let's definitely get a NEAM and Title 21 discussion to the working group then, because I don't want either of those to wait to the next ground base, if we can
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Al, if you can help with that, that would be fantastic.
Okay, well, it's it's clearly a matter of interest to all of us about these scheduling these meetings. But anyway, we can talk offline about it, but thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. And as I said, I've just had a hard time wrapping my head around all of this, but I think today my head's a little clearer. I hope yours are too. And Bert, we're really looking forward to those draft reports when you can get them out to us. Thank you. And everyone keep safe.
Thank you.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay.